Good morning. Welcome to the Inside Texas Football YouTube channel, powered by InsideTexas.com. I'm Joe Cook, got Justin Wells, got Ian Boyd. It's another edition of Thursday Morning IT Live. AR, good morning. Roaster, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. We got some news to talk about, fellas. It's a fun time over in the world of Texas football. Obviously, Tashard Choice leaves the Longhorns to head to the Detroit Lions, and as his replacement, Steve Sarkisian has hired Chad Scott from West Virginia. Been a guy who's been with Neil Brown for a long time. This is one of those things where we can look a little bit back to our Big 12 expertise days, Ian, and see a little bit of what Chad Scott has done working for Neil Brown, not just as running backs coach, but as offensive coordinator and even as his interim head coach. So what are some of what were some of the traits that that West Virginia's offense had, I guess, kind of from a very high level, and then who are some of the main guys that they used in the past few years under Scott that indicate some good development?
They were, for an air raid team, they were really similar to Sark in the run game, because they were real big on inside zone, outside zone counter. They were actually more like a Tom Herman duo type inside zone, just like downhill, smash people out of the way. Neil Brown's been like that for a while. It's kind of interesting when you watch his teams. You know that he was like at Troy and Texas Tech and played for Hal Mumme and Mike Leach, you know. But then I guess with Chad Scott, I guess they might have even briefly been teammates at Kentucky. I'm not sure. But but they're very physical. They usually weren't even very good at throwing the ball at West Virginia, ironically enough. It was all about whether they could run the ball. And for Texas fans, they're going to remember. They might remember. I don't know how well they remember West Virginia players in the last 5 years, but Letty Brown was the guy for a long time there. They actually didn't recruit him. He was already on campus when they got there, and he's like a big, thick guy, like I guess like Baxter, right? Maybe a little shorter, but big like Baxter. And then C.J. Donaldson was the dude that came up later. And he was like 6'2", 215 out of high school. They got him, and they're like, we think he's going to be like a flex tight end guy that can also run the ball and do all sorts of stuff. And then they had a transfer from Clemson named Lynn J. Dixon.
Oh, yeah.
That was supposed to be the guy for them after Letty Brown left. But then he left before the season. He retransferred back to Tennessee. We can only assume why. And so they're like, okay, well, let's move this Donaldson kid to running back in fall camp and see how it looks when he was just a freshman. And he was already up to like 230. And then they're like, oh, it looks really, really good. And then they debuted him against Pitt on one of those like week 0 Thursday, Friday night kind of games. And he was like running wild on Pitt. And so they were, oh my gosh. Texas, he didn't have a great game. He played Texas later that year, and he took like Moro Ojomo's knee to his head or something and had to be like carted away. And
I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah. They were worried it was something really serious. It ended up not being more than just a concussion, thankfully. And he'd been kind of the guy there for the last few years. Now he's transferring to Ohio State. And then the other running back. So it's really just been Letty Brown, C.J. Donaldson. And then the last 2 years, they have this like sort of Darren Sproulsy kind of guy named Jaheim White. It's like 5'7", 195. And he is awesome. In my article up right now, I have a couple of his highlights from the last couple of years at West Virginia. We never saw him against Texas because we weren't on the schedule. But he's like, he's built kind of like Sproles. He's actually taller than that. His style would be something like, I don't know, help me out, Kendall Hunter.
I mean, he's 5'7", 195, something like that.
He doesn't look that short playing, though.
Right.
Like he runs between the tackles. He does a lot out of the backfield as a receiver.
He had a 7.7 yards per carry average during his freshman season. And a lot of that has to do with I looked it up. Garrett Green, the quarterback there at West Virginia, they run him a lot too. So they do a lot of different things with the quarterback run game. But he has coached all different types of backs, whether it be a running back that he inherited, a tight end that he turned into a running back, or a speedier guy. And they're from all over too. You kind of noted Ian, that they're from Florida, from Pennsylvania. And Justin, this is a little bit of a newfound area. It's been over 10 years since he was recruiting the state of Texas for Senator Tuberville. And now he's back in Texas having to recruit top-tier backs, like we mentioned last night, like Javian Osborne, like KJ Edwards, heck, maybe like Tredarian Ball, even a few others that we even mentioned that hadn't really been on Tashard Choice's radar quite yet, but could pop onto Scott's radar now that he's going to bring in his own views and estimations of what needs to be at the running back position.
Looks like a Florida kid, Florida guy. Anytime you can get a guy from Florida and he's coaching in college, there's usually some connections involved. One thing of note, he's already offered Javian Osborne, one of the top targets in 2026 class, the running back out of Forney. Chad Scott offered him when he was at West Virginia. That's a good thing for Texas fans because that's the guy. There's a handful of guys you really want to get in on with this new coach, but that's the one. You want to connect with him quickly. And so he's familiar with Osborne, but what it's going to do is going to rearrange the running back board. There's going to be some in-state guys that I think Texas is going to go for. There's going to be some out-of-state guys. It's going to be interesting because Choice was so hell-bent on going out of state for so long. I'm curious how Scott's going to do this. He's actually coached in Texas before, so there's some familiarity there with getting on the road, and hopefully he kept up some of that stuff. But I like the proof is in the pudding for this guy. Whenever you've handed him a tailback, he's produced. Whether it's recruited, transferred, whatever. When you hand him when you put a prospect in his running back room, he produces. And to me, that's the biggest thing you can ask for.
Ian, I kind of take the fact that Donaldson got picked up by Ohio State as a little bit of evidence that this guy can coach him up pretty well.
Yeah, or find him. Like Donaldson was good pretty fast there. So, but he was not like a highly prized recruit. He was like one of your classic mid 3-star guys out of Florida,
Miami, yeah.
Where I don't know how it is that Miami, it's like everybody knows that you look for players in Miami. Everyone goes there to find players. And then you still like the 3-star that comes out of there that no one recruited heavily ends up being just a freaking stud. So
the problem with that area, especially Dade County, they're fringe guys. They're all potentially good athletes. Some will qualify, some will not qualify. That's kind of the thing that you worry about with Dade County.
It's like very similar to, what's the right way to say this? I feel like there's a little bit of East Texas to it. Like everybody knows who the big star guys in East Texas are. Like remember people like Keontae Ingram, even someone like
Kendre Miller. Nobody knew about Kendre Miller at TCU.
Right. Savion Williams. I know that's kind of on the border of East Texas. And
he'll get Marshall. Yeah.
Oh, he was Marshall. I thought he was Melissa for some reason.
No, he was Marshall.
Anyway, like a lot of these in-state schools and even out-of-state schools know what they're looking for when they're recruiting the best guys in East Texas. But those, guys who are really good in East Texas schools, but maybe not, that's when the other guys come in and try to pick them out from Florida specifically.
Exactly.
And that's why he ends up at West Virginia. That's why, I'm trying to think of who else. Everybody's going to come around. Everybody from around the country is going to come in and try and get Jeremiah Smith and Dia Bell. But are you going to get maybe Dia Bell's teammate who, maybe isn't great at running routes but can run a 4.3, that type of thing?
Yeah. He seems to have a knack for evaluation. He hits when he needs to. When he has a guy, they know what to do with him. I don't know how hard it was to develop Lenny Brown or TJ Donaldson or Raheem White. They were all kind of instantly good, but he didn't screw it up. We know that at least. I'm kind of interested in the the fact that he had to go all over the country to find these guys, I don't think Texas needs him to look all over the country for running backs. You know, it's not hard to find them in Texas, like just a few obvious ones. But I do wonder if that pretends well for him being a volume recruiter that works hard and travels around to help other people find players.
That's what Choice was so good at.
Right.
So
That's kind of what you need at the position, right?
I'm trying to look up CJ Donaldson's high school stats, and as best I can tell, during his senior year, he had 1 carry. But also during his senior year, he had 81 receptions for 1,164 yards and 13 scores. Like, CJ Donaldson was not a running back, and they turned him into one. So I really feel like you can point to that guy and see, you know, for what West Virginia was, a 9-3 regular season team in 2023, him being the catalyst is a good thing. I was trying to figure out.
Hey, that 1 carry was impressive. That 1
all
carry
13 yards.
That carry was good.
One thing I was trying to figure out where the connection is, because when we looked at the last couple hires, Kenny Baker tried to find the connection, and I think it was McDaniel, and there was one other defensive coach that I can't remember his name, but there was some sort of connection there with Chris Jackson. You know, probably someone he was recommended by the pros. I think the recommendation may have come from the general manager, because the only overlap I can find was the year Brandon Harris was at North Carolina. Chad Scott was there too. So I think that may be, you know, hey, here's this guy. You know, you try to put together a candidate list, and I feel like that's the one that that's the one at least I see on the surface. Justin, we'll go through a few different of the questions. I feel like recruiting is about who can evaluate best, like the ones who know which lower rated guys are better than the higher rated ones. Sure, at the position, but you have what the thing that made every Tashard choice so popular among Texas fans and among recruits was that he would recruit everybody. I mean, even Parker Livingstone, a wide receiver, backup wide receiver, I think had a thank you farewell post for Tashard choice. That kind of speaks to what he did recruiting wise, but what is it? What do you think about this question or this comment from Miles?
I mean, I think that's the essence of recruiting in general, finding the lower rated guys that are better than the higher rated. You know how hard it is to find a 5-star? It's not hard to find, because if you pull up to any school, they'll tell you all about it. What's hard is to find that middle of the road 3-star that you know can excel, that has a long developmental curve, that maybe hasn't peaked yet, that has more size in a frame and more moldability and all those things. That's the key to that. That to me is recruiting 101. And the running back coach generally can't just recruit running backs. You know why? Because you only take 2 a cycle. So you need to help out with some of the other parts, the other things, and I think that's what Tashard was so good at. You know, him and Jeff Banks were such a good team, a duo of being able to just go state to state and offer who they wanted. It's gonna be curious what kind of autonomy they give Scott in that realm, and I think Florida is going to be where he starts. I think that's where he's going to go hit pretty hard, and then obviously you're going to have to hit Texas, and again with him having some familiarity recruiting around here, I think that helps as well. But that's what you want to find. CJ Baxter's, everyone knows a CJ Baxter because he's been written about. He's got 35 offers. He's a 5-star, blah, blah, blah. It's that 3-star that nobody's talking about. It's the guy like we talked about earlier, the Kendra. Can you find a Kendra Miller? That's the key. Can you find a guy out of a 1A school, a 2A school in East Texas that can wind up being an all-conference running back and wind up playing in the NFL on a regular basis? If you can do that, man, that's the key to all of it. It's relationships, it's familiarity, it's knowing what you're looking for. But hey, pulling out those mid 3-stars. Let's just think about it real quick. Gunnar Helm, 3-star. Like that's the kind of guy you got to go find. If Chad Scott can find a couple of those, Texas fans are going to love him.
I think also knowing which 5-stars to get.
110% in the NIL era in 2025, you got to know which ones you go for and which ones you don't go for.
Drayton,
you're not just recruiting a kid anymore. You're recruiting the parents.
Drayton's not so popular anymore because he wasn't a volume recruiter like his successors. But he was a great coach at the position for what that's worth. Who knows? Maybe not that much, but something. And his evals were outstanding. Bijan, remember, like everybody's like, "Oh, Bijan, duh." It wasn't a duh at the time. It was the Alito guy, Jason McClellan,
Zach Evans,
at the big schools in Texas, and everyone was like, obviously you get those guys. Those guys are way better than this Arizona kid that we've never heard of. And then the next year was like Jonathan Brooks, and it was like, who even is Jonathan Brooks?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that was one of your 3 stars, Justin. But
I think Brooks started out as a 3-star.
I think so.
Texas was his 4-star.
Texas was either his first offer or his first big offer. Like it was like Lamar and
he was still under recruited, Joe.
Yeah. And I think I wouldn't be surprised with Jonathan Brooks if he got like offers from other schools and didn't tweet them out and didn't report them. He seems like
110%.
He seems like the type of player who would have done that and been like,
that's exactly what he would have done.
I'm just gonna go ahead and go on to Texas and not even worry about it. One of the other things that I've kind of forgot to mention, and we've all kind of forgotten to mention, is that he's been a guy who's been with Neil Brown for the longest time, dating back to Tech, probably teammates at Kentucky, overlapped at Troy. Just someone who has been with Neil Brown for a long time. Obviously, Neil Brown got fired. Scott was the interim. West Virginia runs it back with Rich Rod. And who knows whether it was Jaheim White that necessitated this or whether it was Rich Rod saying, I like this guy. Rich Rod was going to keep him. Rich Rod, who I think knows a little bit about the run game in some form or fashion, Rich Rod was going to keep him around for his next iteration in Morgantown. And I think that kind of shows a little bit of, was he going to be offensive coordinator still? No, I think Rich Rod was still going to keep I think Rich Rod calls the plays, but Ian, this shows a little bit of versatility, I think, in what he's able to provide from development and scheme.
I thought you were going to go in a different direction with the Neil Brown thing. You had a great take before the show.
Oh, we can get to that, but what do you think about the Rich Rod part of it?
Yeah. Well, I wonder how much of that also, it just begs the question, like a big reason that Sark kept Drayton was because the running backs on campus loved Drayton, right? So he inherited
the running back on campus loved Drayton.
Yeah, what did I say?
Well, backs, but it was about Bijan.
Yeah, Bijan, Roshan and Brooks too, but I think Bijan was the big part, right? So he's like, I'm going to keep this guy around and keep Bijan happy, right? And you wonder if Rich Rod is doing that with Jaheim White. So we're not trying to like meddle or anything, but you wonder if Jaheim White is going to stick with West Virginia now that his position coach is gone.
Meddle. You're supposed to meddle. It's 2025. Tampering does not exist.
It's not my job.
You go call that guy and his parents right now. Well, you go send someone to the classroom to send him a telegram. You call him, text him, email him, get his agent on the phone, get his grandmother on the phone. You meddle like hell. Don't tell me you don't meddle. It's 2025. You got to win, baby.
The staff should meddle. I'm not.
The whole staff. The whole school.
I will say staying in Rich Rod's scheme is probably somewhat appealing. But anyway, yeah, you wonder if Jaheim White leaving,
you keep saying Jaheim White, and I'm sorry, I have to say this one time. I swear it keeps sounding like Jaleel White, which is Urkel. So I honestly I can't get that out of my head now because of the comparison. I'm sorry, Ian. He's so much better than Urkel. He may not can hoop like Urkel, but he can run the ball.
We need the Stephon Bruce Lee version, and we need him to transfer to Texas.
There you go.
Ian, well, you made a good point about what we were talking about, but first we got to hit an ad. Let's go to Laura Baker.
Hi, I want to tell you about Laura Baker. If you're looking for a new home in the 512 or even at this point, let's face it, 737 area code, there's only one number to call. That's Laura Baker at 512-784-0505. As a member of the elite Andy Allen team with Keller Williams, Laura has helped Longhorns find the home of their dreams in Central Texas. Just ask our resident sex symbol, Ian Boyd, who moved all the way from Michigan to Texas with Laura's help. Laura can help you find what you're looking for in the 512, the 737, or even parts of the 254 and the 210. Just, give her a call at 512-784-0505. Her email is in the description as well as the rest of her contact details. She's a friend. Give her a call.
We'll have a lot more on the Chad Scott hire on Inside Texas. We've already got 2 stories up. Justin, you obviously broke it last night. But we live in an era in the NCAA where you have 10 full-time assistants, and there's restrictions kind of sort of on what they can do. But as far as on the field coaching during practice, you can have a bunch of people. Remember, Texas had Scotty Hazelton essentially in charge of the star position. That's one position that got one coach. Corner's got a coach. Safety's got a coach. So you can have as many guys as you want essentially coaching on the field. There's still recruiting restrictions, but not so much during practice. And Ian, there's a current coach, a former West Virginia head coach that is currently without a job right now. And it was also a former UMass Minuteman. And instead of taking that vacant head coach job, I think Neil Brown, if I remember right, kind of looked around and said, this is a dead end even in the MAC. So I wonder would that be a smart addition to Steve Sarkisian's staff if it's available?
I would think so. It feels like a win-win. Like, obviously, people are going to say, like, Neil Brown wasn't exactly an offensive genius, and his West Virginia team struggled a little bit because of that. He always fostered very physical, tough teams. They were always solid. Anyway, he's like not a super impressive former head coach, but a former head coach is a super overqualified analyst.
Yes.
And him having eyes in your building and giving you feedback or giving you feedback on other teams is really valuable. And then for him, if he kind of wants to survey the landscape, take a year in Austin for a cushy salary and not that many hours, right? That's a great setup.
Ian, do you remember when you and Neil Brown had a moment?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, me and Neil Brown could be reunited after our moment years ago.
Well, hey, I guarantee you there's some real estate out there by Liberty Hill. Just give him a call.
Oh, yeah, there's a house for sale down the street. Probably not quite what he's looking for, but for a year,
Yeah, that's a 12-month rental.
Texas is really cushy for that in general. Like, hey, you want to take a year and live in Austin and rebound and just like golf and go to Joe Rogan's comedy club and whatever.
Yeah, it made Gary Patterson write a whole new album.
Yeah, exactly. Patterson enjoyed it. So I think Brown is a perfect candidate for that. And I think he would benefit the program a lot.
I'm trying to look through the current support staff, and oddly enough, like you don't see there hadn't been one of those former head coaches in a while. I think
Larry Fedora.
No Larry Fedora, no Gary Patterson, former Wisconsin guy, Paul Christ. He's not there anymore. Didn't he go back to like Iowa or something like that to coach? I don't know. But like,
yeah,
you look around at that list of, at least in the directory at Texas, and you don't see, at least on that directory, a bunch of former head coaches. And they had that in the past. Even Tom Herman did that, like you mentioned, with Fedora. With I think Everett Withers, when he got canned from Texas State, ended up being with Herman's program for a little bit. I think his son never transferred into walk-on, but still, like, this is something that, hey, he's collecting buyout money from West Virginia. I think he wants to coach again at the right spot. as evidenced by him not taking a UMass job.
He's
That
still
would
young too.
Yeah, UMass would have crawled to give native son Neil Brown the job, and he's a wide receiver guy by trade, I believe, and he brings those air raid background. What offense did Tuberville run? I know it was 10 years ago, over 10 years ago.
Neil Brown ran the air raid for him.
Okay.
Didn't Tuberville talk about recruiting Patrick Mahomes?
Yeah.
When he had nothing to do with Patrick Mahomes' recruitment.
Yeah.
Tuberville. Chad Scott had more to do with it than Tommy Tuberville.
Yeah. Probably none of them had anything to do with it.
They didn't.
No. But hey, Seth Dagey turned into a decent quarterback under Neil Brown, I believe. So maybe
they were kind of potent. They had a game where they lit up. Part of the reason that Bob Stoops was able to run Brent Venables out of town so he could hire his brother was that Tech took it to Oklahoma that year and dropped like 40 or 50 points on him. And so people were thinking maybe Venables wasn't good anymore, and they shoved him out.
And then he goes and is a backbone of several national
champions.
There. One thing about Neil Brown that I think gets overlooked, and we'll get back to Chad Scott in just a second, I think. Man, he was winning at a tough job. Like Troy is, if you think of what UNT is, but you put it in, where's the middle of nowhere?
Central Texas.
Yeah. If you put it in like Fredericksburg.
Yeah.
Like it is not a big school. It is not like there's no deep pocketed boosters. Their most famous alumni is Bray Wyatt, who's unfortunately passed away.
Actually, DeMarcus Ware, but go ahead.
Well, you and I have different interests.
Who's Bray Wyatt?
Former WWE Universal Champion.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm sorry. I was here thinking of DeMarcus Ware and the other really good defensive end edge for the Giants with the name. What was his name? Oh man, they had two of the best ends that you could imagine. Troy did in like back-to-back years.
Humaniora.
Yeah,
there it is. That I think he was the opposite end of Strahan when they won the Super Bowl, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, right.
Troy had some athletes, but recruiting to that little town is almost impossible.
Right, and you're also at a distinct disadvantage because it's a public school, but you're third in the pecking order in the state of Alabama as far as resources go. If Auburn and Alabama are going to get that, UAB is maybe in the middle, and then South Al and Troy are going to be, fighting for the scraps. And South Al's in Mobile, so it's a tough job that he won 10 games in back-to-back seasons there. And I think didn't Kentucky pass over him at some point? So who knows? But Justin, if you are Chad Scott, let's get it back to that. We'll talk about recruiting. We knew what Texas big board was with Tashard Choice, with Javian Osborne, with that being the priority. It looks like Amari Latimer, Xavier Crowell, that's going to be a little bit, that those ships may have sailed with Tashard Choice going to Detroit. Are there running backs now that Texas hadn't paid a ton of attention to that they could maybe slide their way back into if Chad Scott sees fit to start recruiting them? Maybe some names that we haven't heard of in a little while.
There's a couple guys that you might want to, start thinking about. Jonathan Hatton is one of them. He's a good tailback. I think he's Cibolo Steele, San Antonio area. I'm trying to remember exactly, but he's a good-looking guy. Davian Gross, I feel like is a kid that Texas might kick the tires on. He's not necessarily a running back. He's not necessarily a wide receiver. He's just a really, really good football player who is incredibly fast. He's one of the top fastest kids in the state. Texas didn't really Tashard. Coach Choice wasn't that interested because he doesn't have a natural position. But I could see somebody checking him out because Gross has something that everybody covets, and that's a lot of speed. And then those are two guys. I think you could see Texas push harder for a KJ Edwards. I really do. I think he's going to stay in state. It's going to be one of three schools, Texas A&M, or SMU. He's going to stay in state. I think Texas could push a little harder, and I honestly, I think that's what's could bring them together. Like before Choice left, I was wondering where KJ Edwards fit in this class. I don't wonder that anymore. I think he could be a part of this group, especially if Osborne heads up north to Ian land in Ann Arbor, because I think Michigan took the lead in that recruitment when Coach Choice left for Detroit. There's just a couple guys, Hatton, Davian Gross. There's a few other guys to pay attention to. There's going to be a couple guys that pop up, and that's what's going to be so much fun. It's kind of rearranging the big board and figuring out what they're going to do. I feel like they're going to go back to Florida. I feel like he's going to go into Florida. He's going to know some of these guys. There's some of one of the top tailbacks in the country. I think it's Derek Cooper is down there. That's a guy that they might kick the tires on. So I feel like in Texas went to Florida, obviously too. You've got C.J. Baxter, Jarrett Gibson. That they were there as well. But that's where Scott has some roots. So I am anticipating them kind of looking in state a little bit more and probably going to Florida and seeing if they can unearth some of those relationships.
Ian, when you think of talking about West Virginia, what's their like recruiting profile? Like obviously they pick off the
go to Florida, get athletes, refill.
But what is there? Because I'm looking at some of the running backs that West Virginia offered in the 2026 class, and it's everywhere. So what are they usually? And before we get to that, Sugar Daddy, appreciate the super chat. Always fun to have you with us.
That would be really good for blueberry muffins. Man, that'd be really good. Warm with some butter on them. Man, Sugar Father's got me hungry.
Ian, but what might be the recruiting profile to a school like West Virginia, where I'm looking right now? They only have 2 players in the state that have the list of top recruits in West Virginia is 2 players long on 3.
Yeah. Sorry, Justin's got me thinking about blueberry muffins and biscuits now, but so his takes were often from the Midwest. He had a couple kids out of Ohio, like ex-urban Ohio, even not like the big cities in Ohio. And White was from like the middle, smack dab in the middle of Pennsylvania, which is like, if y'all have ever heard the James Carville thing, Pennsylvania, he says Pennsylvania is Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Alabama in between. And so Jaheim White came from Alabama in between. It's a lot of Appalachia, basically, and like Rust Belt kind of places. So there was that. They were also Holgerson hit Florida really hard, like Justin was talking about. Like most of the good players that were like skill players that you ever heard about at West Virginia over the years were often from Florida. They also, Western Pennsylvania is usually pretty important for them. And then Neil Brown had a particular knack for recruiting kind of the rural South because he'd been at Kentucky and Troy and maybe somewhere else in there too. So West Virginia's like, they have their like Appalachia Rust Belt area that's like people like they're on TV in those areas, and those are like the markets that they're prominent in. And then it's, so they get every kid they can out of there, and then they're just all over the place trying to find talent. We thought when they joined the Big 12 that they'd start being able to load up in Texas, and that didn't happen. And it was still like Florida.
They recruited better in Texas when they were in the Big East. True story. Yeah.
They were in like DC too, and in Baltimore. And I think one of the running backs that he took was also from there. So yeah.
It's not
pretty wide net.
It's not the easiest place to get to. That's its issue. And it's not, in the biggest population center.
Fly into Pittsburgh and drive, about 2.5 hours?
Yeah, that's not too bad.
It's maybe 2 hours. Look, it's a beautiful drive. Don't get it twisted. But it's out there.
Yeah. So
Okay,
you're not
don't hold down on the brakes too much.
Yeah, you're not close to anything. Like, yeah, I'm surprised they didn't go to DC a little bit more, but it's not like DC has tons and tons of athletes. They're in the middle of they're 3 hours away from so many different places, but all that talent is an hour away from places they could go.
Yeah.
So it's just it's a tough job to recruit to. What are his tasks off the recruiting trail for this season on the field when you're talking about Trey Wisner, CJ Baxter, Jarrett Gibson, Christian Clark, even Ricky Stewart and James Simon? What are the tasks that Chad Scott has to achieve this year in his new role as Texas running backs coach?
He needs to get a transfer, in my opinion.
That's what I was going to say.
Transfer. It's possible that Texas has a star volume runner on campus right now already, but it's not anywhere near the sure thing we'd like it to be for a season where you have Arch Manning and you want to try to compete for a championship. It'd be pretty unbelievably lame if Texas didn't have a great running back in a year like that. It's pretty lame for Texas not to have a great running back every single year because it's Texas and the state is replete with them.
Yeah.
But to not have one when Arch Manning's a redshirt sophomore would be unforgivable. So I think he's got to get a transfer, and then he probably needs to help Trey Wisner beef up a little bit. Maybe Trey Wisner can do more if he has to. He's got to develop Jarrett Gibson to hold on to the football and know how to do more than he did last year. Jarrett Gibson could maybe be really good if they could develop him. Oversee Baxter's rehab. What do you got, Justin?
Nothing. I'm smiling at you.
I know what you're smiling. What else you got for Chad Scott's to-do list?
Yeah, to me, he's just going to get everybody aligned. Yeah, I'm going to go Tom Herman on you. There needs to be alignment. Look, that room, half that room had been dinged up in the last year. Get those guys healthy. Earn their trust day one. CJ Baxter has the ability to be your day one, volume one running back. He has that ability. This is the year he has to put it together. He does it this year, or he's probably on another campus. That's kind of the reality, I feel like, with Baxter. Get him ready, get him right. Because once spring rolls around, you want to see where you're at with him. He's closer to ready than Clark is. Clark, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer, I feel like. And then, honestly, I do think they're going to have to, Texas was adamant against bringing in a tailback from the portal. That was a choice. That might change. And Ian said it. When you've got an Arch Manning for the next 2 years, you're going to try to make a national championship run. You better have a nice tailback behind him. It would be a mortal sin to not have that. And so you just got to have to get these guys lined up, get them aligned, get them understanding where you're coming from, earn the trust, and understand too. You got a 1,000-yard back coming back. Like Trey Wisner is one of the hardest runners in college football. He's going to have a nice little room to play with. Just earn those guys' trust. Get on the recruiting trail and recruit more than just running backs. Go down to Florida, hang out with Kenny Baker. They've got ties down there. Jeff Banks loves it down there. Get down there and hang out and find you a couple guys.
Before we keep going, got to show some love to our other sponsor, and that is Andre the Lawyer.
This video is brought to you by Andre the Lawyer. If you're injured, trust the team that secured millions for their clients and helped thousands of Texans with their injury case. Car wrecks, slip and falls, 18-wheeler accidents, on-the-job injuries, and wrongful deaths. Don't let insurance tell you what your claim is worth. Hire Andre the Lawyer to fight for you. Principal office is in Dallas, but they serve Texans throughout the state. So don't wait and call Andre the Lawyer today at 214-444-8808. That's 214-444-8808. The contact information is in the description.
I think we've about we'll have a lot more on Chad Scott as we learn more about him over at Inside Texas, but we'll be able to talk a little bit more. Justin, you and I were able to go last night over some of the playoff implications and all these meetings going on in New Orleans, around the country. Ian, I know the deep dive kind of focused on questions, so I'm curious what you saw maybe from any of the playoff news and notes that have come out. the idea of auto bids, the idea of expanding to 14. Let's go playoff, and then we'll go SEC. Just any thoughts that you have on the potential expansion of the playoff, and then as a result, any automatic bids that the SEC and Big Ten would hog compared to the other conferences.
What are the numbers there? Because I feel like I'm seeing mixed.
I've seen. I don't know if it's dependent on 14 or 16, but I've seen 4 and 4 for the Big Ten and SEC, so that's 8. 2 and 2 for the Big 12 and ACC. 1 for the G5, and then as many. It could be 1, it could be 3, depending on if it's 14 at larges, depending on if it's 14 or 16.
It's got to be 14. 16 is a crime.
It's 12 is a crime.
12 is a lot, but at least it's fun.
Yeah.
16 with G5 and ACC and Big 12 teams in the mix is a crime and a joke. Like, what are we doing? They suck. Those teams are not, there's like 1 or 2 teams from those 2 conferences every year worth including, and you don't need 4 of them. It's just, and
they want too much.
Should be better. The seeding should be better, but the way that like Texas like coasted to the finals, to semifinals against like Clemson and Arizona State.
Coasted?
Well, theoretically with the matchup, right? And Oregon had to play freaking Ohio State in their first game, and Oregon was undefeated. It was a total travesty, total miscarriage of football justice. It should be better with the new seeding, but I think including all those teams just muddies the waters. This isn't tournament basketball. It's like these games all carry a big price. It's not like, we made UConn play some crappy podunk little school in the first round. That doesn't hurt UConn in the tournament, but it does hurt teams in this tournament. So go ahead, Justin. Fire away.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be much change in 2025.
Right.
I'd like to see the seedings mixed up a little bit, but Yormark has been adamant he's not going to give away any money. And so I don't think there's going to be an agreement on that. 2026 is going to flip the script.
Well,
the SEC and the Big Ten are going to basically change everything they possibly can. They're going to get in as many teams as they possibly can. To me, this is all leading up to 2026 being kind of a major change. I think it's a small sample size. I don't think we actually know exactly what we've got yet. I'm with you. I think the seeding can change, but I don't think it will. Not this year. Not when you give the commissioners a vote. Whereas in 2026, it's going to be a lot different. I think that's where the angling's coming from. That and a 9-game schedule. I think that's the SEC is destined for that.
Does Brett Yormark actually have power or leverage in this?
Yes.
For about 12 more months, yeah.
Seeding, nothing about the 2025, nothing about the playoff following the 2025 season can change unless every conference commissioner and Notre Dame's athletic director all agree on it. So the playoff, the playoff that occurs after the following season, after this upcoming season, isn't changing. Because if so, then Yormark loses the money that he got from Arizona State, automatically making it to the quarterfinal. 2026, I think the SEC is going to have a lot of sway. But Ian, I get what you're talking about and saying that 2 teams from the Big 12, from the ACC, aren't going to be playoff quality. We saw that this year where the ACC both had their teams get defeated. Their top 2 teams get defeated. Who knows what that looks like with Miami, but hey, they didn't win those games. But then why don't we just go ahead and then if that's the case, the SEC and Big Ten should just go ahead and stop putting up pretenses and break off.
Well, yeah.
And that's probably inevitable anyway.
Yeah. You're going to want to poach a few of these programs. And ideally, you'd have like relegation too. Like if a small program, like if who are those Double Eagle guys that just sold for $4 billion and have been buying Tech's new roster? If Tech is able to leverage that into success, and there is a path for a smaller school, well, no, there's not really. First, if there's a path for a school like that to climb up and join the big leagues, and then another program that maybe doesn't want to pony up anymore or just sucks to get relegated down, that'd be pretty awesome. And can you imagine if they really opened it up and there was really relegation? Can you imagine if like Texas or Oklahoma was in a rut? Let's say Oklahoma, because they are. Let's say Oklahoma was like in a bad rut, and then they were like facing a season where they could be relegated if they didn't win enough games. How entertaining.
And it's one of those things where the evolution of TV money in college sports has mirrored so much about the Premier League in the early 90s. And I'm not a big soccer guy, but the FA, Football Association, and the NCAA look really similar. Like they controlled the media rights, they set the rules, they had the leagues, they had all that. And then all the teams are like, well, if we break off, we'll have Sky Sports start paying us a bunch of money. So we're going to break off and do our own thing. And now with the playoff, teams might be able to do that. The other problem is Liverpool doesn't have a basketball program. And, Everton doesn't have a women's volleyball program. Very valuable, of course, but that's something very different from NCAA football.
It'd be football. It'd have to be football specific for relegation.
Correct.
Yeah.
But then that would require a whole new apparatus and lawsuits and all that stuff. So I know that where you and where Paul fall on the side of, and I remember this was a very contentious topic. Like, how does I got a cough. How does an SMU team that lost its Power 4 conference championship game, compare to an Alabama team that lost to Vanderbilt? Or what would have been the best SEC team that didn't make it? Would it be South Carolina or Ole Miss? Like
South Carolina. Yeah.
Choose all three of those teams would have been better than a lot of the teams that were in there.
So then, and this is the eternal argument, what effect does record have? Especially when one of those losses was to Vanderbilt. That's what eliminates Alabama. So I think that's irrelevant to the Crimson Tide in this instance are irrelevant to the conversation. But what about?
No, it's like what Paul said, like in his recent article, 10-2 with the fourth toughest schedule versus 11-1 with the 45th toughest schedule. Like, what are we doing here? And people always look at the specific losses, like, oh, they lost to Vanderbilt and they lost to Oklahoma. Well, for one, Oklahoma and Vanderbilt, as much as we like to clown on them, would both have won 8 or 9 games with Indiana's schedule.
Yes.
Like, maybe 10 games. Like, Indiana didn't play nobody. And secondly, it's the cumulative effect of playing hard games. Like the idea that your strength of schedule doesn't count against you, or like the specific game where it caught you is what matters. Well, no, it could have caught you at any of those games. It didn't happen to catch Alabama in the big games. It caught them in the smaller games, which are easier to overlook. But that doesn't, it's still a cumulative effect. There's still body blows to count from their games with Georgia and Tennessee and Ole Miss or whoever else they played. So I don't really care for that.
Justin, I know you got to jump off, but I think Ian and I are going to continue a spirited debate and we'll try to solve all the problems of the college football world.
What do you got to do, Justin?
You do your best. I'm about to do my best.
I know. We'll see. So I guess we're both about to take different paths to it, but we agree that the best way is just to break it all off. You know, let the teams that put in a certain amount of money towards their football program care about it enough that can create teams of a certain quality. It stinks to say because I like watching. It was cool to watch Indiana go on a run. Like I don't want to see that go away. And yeah, maybe the next version of Indiana going on a run is South Carolina, definitely a team that more likely falls into the haves and the have-nots going on a run. But like I like, there's still a romantic aspect of fandom of this sport that I understand why you're looking forward to seeing the best play, but there's still some aspects of college football that we're going to lose if we go to that model, even though I know it's the one that's coming down the pike.
Yeah, I do like seeing good underdogs get their shot. I just don't. There's like a difference between Boise State goes undefeated and has this superstar in Ashton Genty, and SMU draws a light schedule on the ACC, or Indiana draws a light schedule on the ACC, or even worse, the Big 12 teams. Like, especially letting in a Big 12 champion to me is like, you should. Like, winning the Big 12 is not easy. If you do that, you're obviously a really good team. But letting in 2 Big 12 teams, and like I don't know what the mechanism is for choosing the second team, if it's the loser of the conference championship game, which is now almost meaningless, or if it's based on some other criteria, like their ranking, is just, I don't know. Like, what are we doing?
Well, one of the things we know is that all these SEC and Big Ten, the commissioners, the athletic directors, they've been in New Orleans. They met yesterday. I know On Three's had some reporting on it. I need to re-piece through it, but kind of got distracted with the Chad Scott thing. And I think they all meet up, I think, in Dallas next week. That's where the CFP committee always meets, and I think that's where they're going to do it again. And it's going to be interesting just to see. I can't wait to see who leaks what. That's what's going to be very, very interesting, because I think we have an idea of who talks to a certain side of the argument in all these instances. And so I'm going to be very curious to see what is enjoyed by certain aspects of the sport and what is, said, no, this can't happen. I am curious why, it seems like for 14 and 16, the path is straight seeding. So no automatic bids that makes number 14 Arizona State and turns them into number 3. They would stay number 14. I think that would have made Texas the number 3 seed instead of the number 6. No, instead of the number 5 seed. And that makes a lot of sense. But why is 16 a travesty? I was very curious why that stuck out to you.
So when is the time for this? When does that take place?
2026 is the first that it could change.
No, sorry. The meeting in Dallas where they're going to...
Next week.
Oh, wow. That's going to be something. We'll have to there'll be some content coming out of that.
Yeah.
I'm glad I know that now. So what I don't like about 16 is, first of all, it's 2 more teams getting in. And so I don't think we need 2 more teams. Like, if the goal is to find the best team and give them a path to prove that they're a worthy champion, it's not obvious to me at all why you would want 2 more teams to make that happen. Because like we could do it with fewer teams. I'm okay with 12. I'm okay with 14. But I don't think adding 2 more teams gets us closer to a path where we choose a worthy champion. I feel like you're increasing the odds of a good team just getting taken down by injuries. The second thing with 16-team format is, correct me if I'm wrong, there are no buys in a 16-team format.
Correct.
I love the 14-team format because you get the automatic bye for the SEC and the Big Ten champion. And it feels like the Big Ten and the SEC champion should get a huge leg up in the tournament because they freaking won the Big Ten and the SEC. And if you're making teams play, so how many games do you have to win in a 16-team tournament to win the championship? So
16 to 8, 8 to 4, 4 to 2, 2 to 1. You have to win 4.
4 games plus the league championship plus the grind of your schedule, which is, we know now, is inevitably going to be 9 conference games. Like, why? Who does that serve? We know who it serves. It only strictly serves for like trying to squeeze money out of the product. Which is, I mean, putting fun games on TV is great, but
Right. Like
think
that was the thing with the playoff, like all this format, and we're talking about this on February 20th, but like once December 21st came around and Texas was playing Clemson, we were all excited as could be.
Yeah. But if Texas had won the SEC championship and they still had to play that first round game against a team like Clemson and Klubnik, I would have been a lot less excited. I would have been interested to see it.
Right.
But I wouldn't have been, and if they had like found a way to lose, like for just a second, it looked like they might.
Yeah.
It would have been like, this is just ridiculous.
So that's why conference championships may be on the chopping block. And the reason they stuck around is because it is an extra game during the holiday season that everybody watches, because it's usually the two best teams. This year it was 1 versus 2. Very often it's been Alabama and Georgia, and they're typically 1 versus 2. Like, those are big cash cows for the conferences. If they can find a new cash cow, I mean, they would like to keep both cows, but if they can get a bigger cow, then they'll probably do that and figure out a way to remove conference championship games. Couple questions.
I'm okay with that if they do that, because as long as they play like 9 or 10 conference games and they have a good Premier League type point system for figuring out who the regular season champion is, I don't know if that's actually that easy to choose a regular season champion though without a championship game, because there's so many teams in both leagues. It's not round robin,
That's how you get one true champion.
Yeah, exactly.
This is obviously mentioning Oklahoma. 14-time conference championship, 1 national championship. Conference championships are overrated. I strongly disagree.
Yeah.
I think your tune would be a lot different if those 14 conference championships were burnt orange. Winning your conference championship means that you were better than your peer programs. And that means a lot. Now there are different levels to peers. And Oklahoma they made 3 or 4 playoffs. And then during the Bob Stoops run, they played in 3 national title games. Like,
4.
Did they lose? Yeah. Did they lose them? Sure. But to say conference championships are overrated, like, no, you want to win your conference. You want to beat your rivals. Like, I know the sport is changing, but let's not lose the core of the sport here. That's why Texas still puts literally every single Southwest Conference, Big 12, and maybe future SEC titles on the side of the DKR Stadium. Like, they're important. They're not overrated. I think it's just being said that way because Texas didn't win any, unfortunately, for a very, very long stretch.
Yeah, I think that's silly. Also, there's how many teams are there in the NFL? 32?
Yes.
30. Okay. How many programs are there in college football that are at least somewhat realistically competing for a national championship?
15, maybe. That's being generous.
I was going to say a lot more, like 50.
Well, in the new way, yeah.
Yeah. So it's really hard to win national championships.
Correct. There's only one out of 134.
I think it's harder than winning the Super Bowl.
I can buy it.
It's close. I very much, I'm with you. I very much dislike that. If you don't win a championship, then how many Texas teams do we look back fondly on that were like really fun seasons, and we think about those years and we watch old highlights of that did not win the national championship? Like the entire Colt McCoy era. No national championship. So it was like, oh, Colt McCoy era was worthless. This would be the implication of that argument, which I'm not okay with. I very much enjoyed the Colt McCoy era.
And yeah, I'm willing to admit that college football definitely evolved in the past 30 years, ever since whatever the Bowl Alliance started. But conference championships are important. Like, that means you won games. You don't win a conference championship for going 6-6.
So do you think like conference championships don't quite matter that much in basketball? They still matter some, but they're not quite. But do you think like it's going to be like the
like
tournament where it's like if you made the Final Four, that's like a big deal, like a etch it into the stadium. Do you think that'll be the deal now with the playoffs?
I thought about that during the past run. Like, how are we gonna think about these playoff appearances? Like, I think a lot of people made fun of TCU when they opened the season in 23, and it was like college football playoff 2022, and they're like, oh well, you'll put a participation trophy up there. Like, let's think about this. Like, this is a Final Four appearance. I'm not advocating for Texas to put that on the side of the stadium, but you should remember Final Four appearances very, very fondly. Like, you should very, very much want to have those types of seasons. Now, and again, like, there's going to be some teams that if it goes to 16, they'll probably print Sweet 16 shirts or stuff like that. But in a sport that went from very regular season focused to now postseason focused, you're going to celebrate those opportunities to say that you were a Final Four team or that you were a national finalist or something like that. Maybe not to the extent where you're like in basketball where you hang Final Four banners for like everybody, like a lot of people do. But to the extent that you at least celebrate that a little bit differently than you would a regular season title.
I think so. Plus, like, it's about the experiences and the memories in the games that you enjoyed watching.
Yeah.
And if you made it to the Final Four, you necessarily beat like 2 to 5 really good teams that year.
Right. And I see this comment, like, this is what I'm talking about. This is how the sport evolved from a regular season sport that we literally, people like you and me used to vote the national champion. You know, that's how it was. That's how it worked out. Like, and I mean, think of what was it? This is going way back. Actually, I can think of a maybe more recent example. Like, and Chris Bennett brings it up. Roll left, Texas beats that Nebraska team that may have been on its way to competing for a national title. Early onset of the playoff championship era, like, roll left was a big deal. That conference title was a big deal. That was when the sport was still more regular season focused. Now we have this postseason focus where you still care about the regular season, but now it's just more about playoff positioning and what happens. And it's an evolution that's changed how we have to think about all these different sorts of accomplishments, including conference titles.
Yeah. In the future, conference titles will probably mean less, but maybe that's all our poster was trying to say, in which case, apologies for berating your opinion. But I would say that the Oklahoma's dominance of the Big 12 in the 2000s and 2010s was really meaningful. And I'm sure I teased them about it at the time when they kept going to the playoffs and falling short. But of course, we would have traded places with them.
Yeah, like, oh no, you lost in the college football playoff. It's like clowning somebody for losing national championship games. Like, you still made it that far. You can do it, but just remember what you're talking about, I guess, is kind of
it is just a little bit funny to make fun of TCU.
Right.
Because not just because they didn't get the conference title either.
Right.
They lost to Kansas State for the first time all year. And then they whipped Michigan, which was really cool and impressive. And then just, totally steamrolled by Georgia. So definitely a big achievement that year, but it almost negates the point. Like, if they had won the conference title, I feel like that would have been a little bit, just a little bit better. It would have gone down a little better.
Yeah, and it's a very big part of the evolution of the sport. So I think teams will start celebrating, and the basketballification of it kind of applies. Like, if you go to Cameron Indoor or Allen Fieldhouse, they have smaller banners for their other stuff, but the main stuff is those national championship banners. They have a banner that lists their Final Four dates. but they have 5 banners or 6 banners for all their national championships. Whereas, you go to Texas Tech, and a little bit different scale here, that Final Four banner is huge at that U.S. Supermarket Arena. And all the other ones, kind of look the same, kind of go around. But like that Final Four one is big. And Texas is the same way. That Final Four, they have 3 little different banners at the Moody Center for the 3 appearance. 3? 2? 2 were like back when only 8 teams made the tournament. But one is from obviously 2003. Like there's going to be scale with how you celebrate certain seasons, certain years. And I think it's something that we're all figuring out as the college football playoff tries to figure out what it looks like. So, Ian, anything else? What's on the deep dive that comes out, I think, a little bit later today?
Paul solicited the Inside Texas message board for questions. We got a gazillion really good ones, and we are now working tirelessly to answer them all. I think most of the ones that will be on there today are more offensive focused. There's one good question that we got was, why is there a disparity in the offensive talent versus the defensive talent under Sark? To which we pushed back and said, I don't think there's a disparity in talent, but there's a disparity in production. Like the defense has been better than the offense for the last couple of years. And why is that? And so that's one of the meatier questions we got into, and we got into a bunch of others. We got into over-under win totals under different circumstances, and it's a good episode. These episodes with the reader questions are going to be really good.
Should be a lot of fun. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. If you have not done that yet, please go ahead and do so. Give us a like on this video. Of course, head to InsideTexas.com. You can ask the questions that we post on here. You can get some more insight from us as we evaluate not just Chad Scott, but the future of the playoff, and hey, recruiting season never stops. So Ian, thank you. Justin, thank you. We'll see you next time on the Inside Texas Football YouTube channel powered by InsideTexas.com.